Serenbe is a place where connections between people, nature, and the arts are nourished. We believe that art has the power to shift perspectives and open both hearts and minds. Today, we are speaking with arts writer and Serenbe resident Gail O Neill and artist Curtis Patterson about Curtis's new permanent sculpture installation in Serenbe, Serenity for Shango. This gorgeous piece sits near the entrance of Serenbe and was designed to pay homage to the lineage of African American culture. This particular installation came about as a result of passionate residents who wanted to commission a piece to be an enduring beacon of welcome. In this episode, we chat with Gail and Curtis about their backgrounds in the arts, the meaning behind Curtis's new piece, and their feeling about the power of art.
I've gone there a couple of times just to the site, and a couple of the neighbors came up to me and found out who I was and just took me on a tour. They didn't know me from Adams prior to meeting me that day, so I really felt a sense of being welcome there, and that's the one thing that I would share with people.
I want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories. This week, we are very excited to have two guests, Gail O Neill and Curtis Patterson, on the podcast. Gail lives part-time in Serenbe. She's actually in New York right now and then headed to Italy. We're very jealous. She is a television and print journalist, a fashion model, and the editor-at-large for Arts ATL, which is Atlanta's leading arts publication. Curtis is an internationally acclaimed sculptor whose work has been exhibited all over the world, the US, France, Sweden, Nigeria, just to name a few. His work is incredible and celebrates African lineage and invites viewers to interact, explore, and unlock their creativity. We're thrilled to share him and Gail and his latest work, Serenity for Shango, which will be permanently installed in Serenbe in just a few weeks from this recording, which means if you're listening right now, you can come see it for yourself. So without further ado, let's get to our interview with Gail O Neill and Curtis Patterson. Hi, Curtis. Hey, Gail. Hey, Steve. How are you guys doing?
Good morning, Monica. This is Gail. Curtis, nice to meet you, meet you, and good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Always good to hear your voice. And Curtis, so looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for our conversation as well.
And Curtis, I heard that this is your first podcast interview.
It is. I've heard about it, but I've never actually participated in one.
Well, we hope this will be the first of many. I would like to start off with Gail and ask you, as we always do with Serenbe Stories, to tell us just a tiny little bit about yourself, but mostly we're curious, how did you first discover Serenbe and what prompted you to come down and make it a part-time home?
Steve Nygren and I have a mutual friend, Carol Martin. She was my neighbor in Midtown, and she's one of these people who's always up for an adventure. So when she called me one day and said, "Girl, you want to go for a ride in the woods?" I said, sure, not knowing that we were going to wind up at Serenbe at the very beginning of the project. Only, let's see, the Blue-Eyed Daisy was there, Steve's home was built, and he was kind enough to give us a tour of his home. He took us to the labyrinth. He told me about sacred geometry, about omega patterns for neighborhood planning, and I thought, what is this place? So subsequent to that visit, every time I had a friend or family come visit from New York, I had migrated from New York to Atlanta in 2000. I always made it a point to bring them to Serenbe just because it was such a cool little community.
I love that.
That's great.
And then Curtis, what about you? You came to us in a very different way. How did you first learn about Serenbe?
I did indeed, and now that I've become a part of it, I realize how uninformed I've been, because every time I mention someone Serenbe, they say, "Oh yeah, I know about it. We go down there for dinner all the time," and I had not heard of it prior to the invitation about a year ago to participate in the call for the piece that I'm doing. So I consider myself more informed now that I know about it, and you guys are really on the map. A lot of people know about you. It was just that I was uninformed. But it's been a tremendous opportunity, and I've really enjoyed working with the people that I've worked with. It feels almost like family, so I really appreciate that.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So tell us a little bit about your background, Curtis. We're going to put a video link and a link to your work in the show notes. I mean, it is incredible, the work that you do. But how did you become a sculptor?
Well, My undergraduate work was in art education, essentially. So I actually taught for 30 years at the Atlanta College of Art. And prior to that, the Atlanta College of Art is now SCAD. They bought us out. But I taught in the public school system for about 6 years prior to that. And fortunately, when I was teaching at the Atlanta College of Art, I had a 3-day work schedule. And I was able to, I got my first commission from the city of Atlanta in 1977. And every so often we got sabbaticals. And it seems like I was really fortunate. Most of the commissions that I got fell on the year that I had a sabbatical. But with having only a 3-day work week, even when I wasn't on sabbatical, I could participate in doing public work. So that worked out really well. And I retired in 2007 from teaching, and I've been doing sculpture continuously since then.
And where did you decide you wanted to do what I'll use the word of sort of monumental pieces? I mean, they're absolutely stunning, so moving, but really, really quite big. And the piece that's going to be at Serenbe is quite large too, versus say something that you could hold in your hand, or these are really big public works. How did that come to be?
The first work I did for the city of Atlanta, and then I did a couple of pieces for the airport. And the scale was pretty much dictated by the venues that did the commission. You know, most of them were public pieces, and always enjoyed that. I don't consider the piece that you guys are getting to be a large scale piece. It's only about 9 feet tall on the pedestal itself, but I think it's going to be really nice for that space. I think it's really a good fit. There's this really wonderful canopy, and there was also kind of a circular platform there, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to create a place or a destination for people to come and gather. And it can be a contemplative space. It can be a gathering space. There's just a lot of possibilities there. And it's a very serene kind of environment, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to use the term Serenity in the title, because you can really feel that. We were there just this weekend pouring the foundation, and it's really amazing how serene the area is.
The piece is really set within the woods. Steve or Gail, can you talk a little bit about the location? And then I would love to get into the process of how it came to be. Like, why this location? Was that something that you guys collaborated on? Curtis chose, you guys chose?
I think Steve can probably speak to that. I know Hannah Brandis was one of the leaders on this project, and Serenbe met her very graciously saying, how can we help? What can we do? What do you need? And I think that's where Steve comes into the picture.
That's right. As we understood some of the goals and the tremendous art piece that might eventually emerge, we talked about possible locations, and I had suggested 4 locations for them to consider. And so the committee came back to choose the entrance location, and they're starting to just put the foundations in now. And you can see how wonderful, what a presence it's going to have, yet tucked in the woods right as you come in. I'm just delighted that this particular sculpture, Curtis, is emerging in this place. I think it's just a perfect match on what could happen.
So one of the things that I would love the listeners to know is sort of how this project came to be. And maybe, Gail, you can kick off that impetus and what was going on culturally, societally, and then within Serenbe. And then we can talk about the jurors and then how Curtis was selected. Can you kick us off on that, Gail, a little bit?
This entire project from start to finish, Monica, has gone at warp speed. If I recall correctly, and of course the pandemic is a big blur, we were probably at the start of 2021 when America was in the midst of this racial reckoning. And again, Hannah Brandis came to me, who had not even moved to Serenbe yet. She was building her home in Motto while she was living in Boston. But she came to me and said, I want to do something to make sure that all Atlantans feel welcome here. A, do you feel like that's important? And B, how can we do this? She was thinking in terms of a piece of public art. And I said, Hannah, in terms of welcoming, I've always been a person who could go through the world and make myself feel welcome. I really don't need someone to roll out a red carpet. But as I was walking through, I think I was walking through Grange one day, I saw a huge Black Lives Matter banner in front of a neighbor's home. And I had the warmest feeling inside. Like, I never talk to people about politics. I don't wave flags myself. I don't expect other people to do so. But when I saw this banner, it touched something inside of me. And so I said to Hannah, if it made me feel that way, I can only imagine how it would make someone feel if they were coming to Serenbe for the first time and not knowing whether or not they were welcomed, not knowing whether or not there were like-minded neighbors here, neighbors who were conscious, neighbors who wanted to reconcile and at least acknowledge our past as Americans, for better and for ill. And so that's all Hannah needed. She was off and running. She was in conversation with many neighbors here, and they decided that a public art project would be the most appropriate gesture from Serenbe. And because of my connection to the art world as a writer, I was able to lead them to people with whom they could be in conversation, and also artists like Curtis, who they might want to consider as they were starting a juried selection process. And here we are, a year and a half later.
It is a fast moving project. And I think the fact that Hannah and the team, they're not art curators. This isn't a process that they'd ever done. They just wanted to do something. So they came to you, who really had the background, and brought in some incredible jurors. And so, Curtis, tell us, when you were first approached by this, were you approached by Gail, one of the jurors? How did you first hear the desire to sort of have a public sculpture at Serenbe?
I think it was from Wanda Hughes, I believe. And I think it was fairly generic. I think it went out to about 17 artists. And I got the invitation initially, and I thought, well, I don't know if I really want to do this. First of all, because it said the Black Art Project, and you can very easily become pigeonholed as an African-American artist as not being able to do anything but that. So I was a little bit reluctant. But anyway, I got another invitation, and I decided to go to the meeting. And I think it was I forget whose home it was in, but I remember meeting Steve there, and he told us a lot about the community. And of course, I had an opportunity to go to the site. And I thought, wow, this would really be wonderful, because it's tailored for the kind of things that I've been doing, but I just didn't want to be pigeonholed and not being able to do anything other than that. But I'm glad I did. It's been a tremendous opportunity in working with the people, and we're in the process of trying to get the piece completed in the studio. I'm in there 12 to 14 hours a day. We're going to try and install in a couple of weeks. If not, there's at least 1 week after that we might be able to install, but we're excited about where we are right now.
Monica, to Curtis's point about not wanting to be pigeonholed, that was also my reluctance when Hannah wanted to name the project the Black Art Project. I believe that art is so much more expansive. We humans can be very, very reductive in the way that we think of ourselves and think of one another. So I can't tell you how impressed I was when I saw the video of a big gathering in which Curtis was speaking, and someone was asking him about being a Black American. He said, first of all, I consider myself an earthling. And I thought, my man, that is exactly what you are. You are magnificent. You are magnanimous. You are bigger than any one little aspect of your personality, your race, your ethnicity, your nationality. So, Curtis, I take my hat off to you, and I cannot wait to see this piece.
Well, thank you very much.
So, Curtis, tell us about the piece, Serenity for Shango. You talked a little bit about the location has sort of a serene feeling, and that might be part of it. But what's Shango?
Shango is a deity of the Yoruba tribe, and it's really a figure with a double axe, which means to strike. I use a double iron, actually, to indicate the significance of domestic labor for the people of color. And there's also a connecting element called Nimba, which is from Guinea, that has to do with, they use it for celebration of crops. They have dances to celebrate fertility. And there's another element that's a circular ring that has to do with the unification of people of the African continent. And there are two elements on top of that connecting those elements that are symbolic of a middle-buster plow for harvesting. And there are two elements extended out from the plow. The handles actually serve as kind of a welcoming arm to the pedestrians as they're actually entering the site. And the piece is going to be out of stainless steel. I think it's going to be very visible in all seasons. Even when the vegetation is on the trees, I think you'll be able to see it. It's not overbearing because it's not too large, but I think it has really a pretty nice human scale, and I think people will, hopefully they will enjoy it. There's also seating stations. There are stools. Ashanti stools were created in Ghana, and there are 5 stools around the piece, so you can actually sit, read a book, come out and enjoy nature and walk around the piece. It's somewhat interactive from that perspective.
Well, and I was just on a call yesterday learning a little bit more about it and how you guys are going to launch it and inaugurate the piece, if you will. And I heard there's going to be some music that maybe has yet to be chosen. Is that going to be playing all the time there? Or is it going to, when I walk up to it, will I be able to interact with it? How do you envision sort of the music or sound working with the piece?
That's an interesting question. We haven't really worked that out completely yet in terms of the selection of music, but we do know that we would like to include it. The only thing about the music, there could be someone seated there trying to enjoy nature or just a serene environment, and the type of music is going to be very important. So we decided to just wait until we got the piece installed, and we're going to do some trials and see how they're coming. But I would like the sound to be involved in it. But we haven't really honed it down to what that sound would be at this point.
Monica,
Perfect.
Can I ask Curtis a question?
Of course.
Okay, and this comes about, Curtis, because the first time I brought my family to the labyrinth at Serenbe, we talked from the entrance to the center part and then exiting. And there was a Serenbe neighbor who very generously and graciously explained to us when we were done, not in a judgmental way, that the point of a labyrinth is to enter with a question in mind, to walk through the space. It's supposed to be contemplative, not interactional. And then when you come to the center, you reach the conclusion, you get an answer, and then you exit. So in other words, we were blabbing when we should have been silent. So I wonder, Curtis, how do we respect these Ashanti stools and the centerpiece? Is there a protocol around that? Is there something I should know when I enter so I'm not the ignorant American going in there and blundering through the way I did the labyrinth?
No, I mean, I think it depends on you, whatever you'd like to do. It's on the pedestrian path, so you just kind of encounter it. You can actually enter and exit without obstruction. You can walk around the piece and not stumble over the stools. I mean, you can just continue through and not do anything. Or if you want to pause momentarily and kind of explore or sit there momentarily, that's a possibility also. But hopefully there will be kind of a gathering space for people to come and enjoy collectively or individually.
And will those stainless steel stools heat up in the dead of summer? Like, will I sit on it and go, ooh, like a cartoon character? Or... I'm just wondering about these practicalities. Yeah.
That is a very, very good question. I did a piece for Roy Wilkins up in St. Paul on the state capitol grounds some years ago. And it was right out in the sun. Of course, this piece was done out of bronze, and it had seating stations on it also. And one of the things that they were concerned about is what you were concerned about. And they were absolutely right. Of course, I had not given any thought to it. But what we decided to do was actually put over the benches, they're the same shape, but it's just wood, which would not soak up the heat like the metal would. But I think in this case, because of the really wonderful canopy that we have over the piece, I mean, it's really actually covered. I don't think there will be an issue with these pieces at all because the sun is going to be indirect. But that's a very good question.
And Steve, can you tell us a little bit more about the space? This area was originally a separate piece of property that has changed hands a few times, is now incorporated into Serenbe. How large is this, what we're calling Deer Hollow Park? And what's your sort of vision, as well as I know there's the art farm here that will be taking on the piece and managing it, making sure that it in the condition ongoing. What do you sort of see as the future of that Deer Hollow Park, Steve?
Where the sculpture is sitting is part of land that's been part of Serenbe at the entrance. It's just been a forested area as you drive in. And it's that transition. Many times people are expecting when you arrive somewhere for the first time They're expecting gates. They're expecting all sorts of things that we've come to think of with development entrances through the years. And so we were very intentional on having this a rural, forested-looking area. And the first things you have seen is the stables, the large stables. So that really enforces the agrarian. So this piece sits right inside the entrance. This will now be the first thing that you will see through the woods, but it so incorporates with the natural landscape that it's not obtrusive at all. That's so wonderful about this. And there's right next to it is 10 acres that we had purchased part of a historic farm. The Shell family has had the land since the 1800s. And then when they sold it, I bought it as part of our holdings when we were still in retirement before we dreamt of doing a development. And we sold 10 acres of that land for friends. First, through Bella Cucina, they were going to do a cooking school in their home there. That never happened. And then they sold it to John and Karen Reed, and they were going to build their great house there. And that never happened. And so now we've incorporated it back into Serenbe, and it's going to have some estate lots. But the greater part of the open area is going to be incorporated into this land next to our entrance. And so that entire area will be named Deer Hollow. And there'll be open fields behind us. So the path that Curtis mentioned will lead on to open fields for passive recreation and events. This is a field that Terminus has performed in the past, our contemporary dance group. So some people might be familiar with it. So this will all be developed in a very landscaped, natural way now.
That's fantastic. So I want to turn back to the arts for a second. And this is sort of a question for maybe Gail first and then Curtis. With your arts background and all the work that you do, it's so important. We hugely believe Serenbe, the art form, all of us, like it can really change your life, right? Art can just move you. And sometimes it's inexplicable. You don't know what it's doing. You're standing in front of a piece or you're feeling a piece of music. Tell me a little bit about what drew you in, Gail, to the arts originally, and why do you stay? And maybe I'll even do a quick add-on because we talked before we got on the podcast about other artists and their generosity with you.
I was drawn into the arts by Kathy Fox, who was the founder of Arts ATL. At the time, I was writing a blog and I'd written a movie review of the film Belle. And it was sent to Kathy by a mutual friend, and she asked if she could annotate it for Arts ATL's website. I had never heard of Arts ATL, but I said sure, because I never say no to any opportunities or chance to learn something new. And subsequent to that, Kathy asked if I would do a book review and then if I would review a show at the High Museum. And I just kept saying yes. And I had never written about the arts before, but I know how they make me feel. And so through that entree, I was able to meet the most incredible artists throughout Atlanta's landscape: dancers, actors, writers, painters. And in learning more about them, Monica, I learned more about not only the general population, but I learned more about myself. I learned about how disarming the arts can be, how it can capture our imaginations and our intellects when we least expect it, soften us, open us up to other people's perspectives, and just make us better stewards and citizens of one another's humanity. So that's what keeps me here. And then what I was saying to you earlier about the arts is that, and this is something Okori Johnson, he's known as OK Cello, this brilliant cellist, who I think will actually be participating in the opening ceremony of this new public art installation at Serenbe.
Wonderful.
He said to me that he's practiced art in New York and in Washington, D.C., where he's from, in Los Angeles, but that no other city rivals Atlanta in terms of the generosity that artists offer to one another. They're willing to share contacts. They're willing to big up one another, as we'd say in Jamaica, because they don't see opportunity as a zero-sum game. They see it, if you're rising, then I'm rising too. I get something from that. And so I think that we're very lucky to be in Atlanta for that reason.
I think that's beautiful. I really like that. And I think we should be celebrating that more and more. So Curtis, obviously you've spent your entire career in arts and education, and then now since 2007, really focused on your work. So is there somebody that you feel was really generous to you that maybe was a turning point or has driven you, or if you felt like held you up, that you want to acknowledge or share?
I think I'd like to cite my high school. I didn't take art in high school. I took a graphic design class. And one of the teachers told me one day, I was about 16 years old, and he told me he thought I had a really good eye for design. And that was just such an indelible experience for me. I hold on to it to this day. And I think he was responsible for actually me choosing art as a career as I look back on it. And I've met some of my professors at Georgia State were very influential also. And a lot of the African American artists, there was an exhibition that was held here in Atlanta when I was in undergraduate school back in the 60s for African Americans, because there were really no venues for African Americans to exhibit their work. It was called the Atlanta Annual Art Exhibition at Clark Atlanta University, and it was done by a man by the name of Hale Woodruff. And interestingly enough, since I mentioned his name, he did a mural over at Atlanta University that has Shango in it. And it's the first time I saw that image, and I was just really intrigued by the power of the image itself. And that's one of the reasons that for the last few years I've been kind of studying that, and that had a lot to do with the piece that I did for you guys. But yeah, I've had a lot of positive influences in my life, and I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. But
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been a very positive experience.
Monica, I would like to encourage listeners to visit two of Atlanta's most underutilized resources, and that would be the Clark Atlanta University Museum of Art and Spelman's Museum of Fine Art. Their permanent collections are unparalleled. They have pieces that places like LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, is trying to obtain now. So all I can say is run, do not walk, and visit both of these resources. You can just walk in, they're welcoming. I think they recommend masking, but that's up to the individual.
Exactly. Well, we'll put links to both of those so people can look at their times that they're open. That's a great, great tip. I think I'll just say that the mentors of educators and those young, impressionable times are so important. And I think having something like a public sculpture that anybody can come to, kids, old, young, is so important because you just never know what's going to move you and what's going to maybe be a tipping point or a catalyst to move your life into a new way. Wanted to wrap up and ask a question that we ask everybody, and I'll throw this again, maybe to both of you guys, is what is one thing that you would tell somebody that's visiting Serenbe? What should they do? What can't they miss? And I don't know, Gail, if you want to go first as a part-time resident, and then Curtis, I'd be super curious now that you're informed, now that you're here, what is that thing? Or is there a thing?
The first thing that captivated me was the architecture and the intentionality behind how the neighborhoods were created. And then the Dr. Seussian light sculptures and the newer, more modern light sculptures. But I would say that the thing that people should not miss is the opportunity to engage with residents. Just say good morning or good afternoon, and feel free to ask, how did you find this place? Because I guarantee you will hear the most extraordinary stories about how people came to buy a cupcake from the Blue-Eyed Daisy because they saw it in the cupcake challenge and they wound up buying a home here. So what you will find are people who are moved by intuition and who respect that instinct enough to act on it, to not question, well, I didn't plan to be here. I'm not a Georgian. What do I know? I don't know anybody who. People just feel and then they respond. So just say, as Maya Angelou would say, good morning.
It's a beautiful summary, and I think that's what people feel on the street, because there is a greater openness than people are used to, because people that lead with their heart tend to be more open in general. So great summary, Gail.
Steve, I take my hat off to you. I see you as the sun that has brought together this extraordinary constellation. I don't know how you did it. Some people feel like Serenbe is a sacred space. I guess you're the shaman.
Nature somehow pulled me in as a steward of this land at this time. And I see myself as that current guardian. But being a hospitality person, I've also known how to invite the right people to the table to create what we now know as Serenbe. And that table keeps getting larger and more diverse and more exciting all the time.
How did the Serenbe come about, Steve?
It called to me intuitive, as Gail said. There was no logical reason. We bought it on a Sunday afternoon to visit farm animals. and it changed my life. We moved here. And in my 6th year of retirement, we looked at what we could do to save this great land from traditional urban sprawl, which had not reached out into the southwest corridor of Atlanta, but it was on its way. We looked at the countryside of England and the English land laws after World War II that had preserved the countryside and yet accommodated a large population in the hamlets, villages, and towns. And so we set about to show how that could be done on American soil.
Okay.
Well, Curtis, now that you've been invited to the table, is there something that you would share to your friends and family? Like, this is an interesting place, and maybe you should check out this one thing, obviously beyond your sculpture.
One of the things that I was really impressed with was the labyrinth. I thought that was really exciting. And when Steve told us how it was actually done by having the residents who actually build it, I thought that was really pretty amazing. I've been involved in this project for about a year now, but I haven't really spent a lot of time there on the campus. That's the one thing that I do remember being very impactful to me. And of course, the people that I've interacted with have just been so warm, and I've gone there a couple of times just to the site, and a couple of the neighbors came up to me and found out who I was and just took me on a tour. They didn't know me from Adams prior to meeting me that day. So I really felt a sense of being welcome there. And that's the one thing that I would share with people.
Well, that's wonderful, Curtis. I appreciate it. Is there anything else, Gail or Curtis, you guys want to share with our listeners today? Obviously, we invite everybody to come out and see the piece, which by the time this airs, it will be installed. And we'll put details in the show notes of how to get there and how to find it. It's open to the public anytime. But any last words or how we can support both of you guys?
I would like to say thank you to Wanda Hughes. Wanda's the one who found Curtis just by Googling. You know, I had a list of people whom I'd written about in the past and so on. Curtis, I'd never heard of you before, but I went down the rabbit hole and I cannot wait to see your piece in place. And I just want to say thank you to Wanda for bringing you to us. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Curtis, any final words? I don't know if you do social media, if we can follow you anywhere, or how we can support your work.
I just had a show in Savannah, which is closed now. I have another show coming up, and the same show is going to travel to Richmond, Virginia, and it opens in November. And I'll also be participating in Art Basel in Miami in December of this year. I'm not much of a social media buff, but those are a couple of things that are coming up.
Okay, good. Well, we'll share those out with everybody, and those would be phenomenal for if people are in the area or make that trip to go see both of them. Well, thank you guys so much. I just am thrilled. Gail, I've known you for quite some time. Curtis, I look forward to meeting you at the opening, and thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.